for my voice, but I have never seen anything like it.
Do you believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
Welcome back to the show. Very special podcast today, breaking down number 52 through 36 on the all-time 2000s team, the 2000s list. We've been doing it all week. That is a decade we're breaking down this week. We're talking a little bit about everything, going over some Hall of Famers, talking about some NBA champions. This is where it really turns it up. Wednesday through Friday is really when you start getting the best of the best. Because once you get into the top 50, this is when you start getting some real recognizable names. You start getting some guys that have gone to not one, not two, but multiple, 3 or 4 all-star games. And this is really where we've cut our teeth. So, very excited to talk about these guys. Also need to remind you, the NL West preview, that is up today as well. We pushed it back from Monday to Wednesday so we could give you guys more middle-of-the-week content. Also talking about Cam Newton, a little bit of NFL news coming out this week. So, all that and more, but let's talk about the NBA. Let's talk about the top players from the 2000s. At number 52, he played 10 seasons. He was the iconic player next to LeBron James on those Cleveland Cavaliers team. And we talked about Mo Williams yesterday, so you know who this is. It's Ilgauskas, who played 10 seasons with the Cleveland Cavaliers, went to Miami on that 2011 team, and that's really when he retired, was after that. Averaged 13.7 points per game, 7.5 rebounds, true shooting percentage of 53% from the field. His value over replacement wasn't great at 8.3, but his win shares make up for it at 53.5. Why is this such a big deal? Why do we care so much about this guy? Well, the playoff numbers also about 11-7 in the playoffs, but he was the cornerstone franchise player in Cleveland before LeBron got there. Like, I think that when LeBron doesn't play games in a Cavaliers uniform, if they just had the all-time team before he went back to Cleveland, now you would probably say, well, Kevin Love's on that team. He's probably starting. Tristan Thompson's on that team. He could start. Mark Price fills in at the 2, Kyrie at the 1, LeBron playing the small forward position. Ilgauskas gets probably pushed back to the second team. But in that first run with the Cavaliers, before the Kyries and the Kevin Loves of the world really start making a name for themselves in Cleveland, Ilgauskas would be your starting center, I think. And that is that's the type of player that he is. That is the type of impact he had on the city. I think that he fits in right here. Out of the top 50, he's in that same group with the guys that we mentioned yesterday, the Alonzo Mournings, the Grant Hills, the Vlade Divacs of the world, who just were good, very solid role players. Ilgauskas also only makes 2 All-Star games in the decade. Again, we talk about why All-Star games matter. When we talk about the best players of a decade, if you're making multiple All-Star games, it means something. If you make 1 or 2, you're a really good role player on a pretty good team. That's kind of how this All-Star game voting works, in my opinion. At number 51, he played for the 76ers and went to the NBA Finals. He's remembered more from the 90s, being an incredible shot blocker. He had one of the best nicknames, I think, in sports, Mount Mutombo. It can't be Mutombo. 9 seasons in the decade. His points per game, 6 points per game, about 8 rebounds, 7.7 rebounds. But the thing that made him stand out is the defensive win share. And even though he only played a handful of seasons, only played 9 seasons in the decade, and I know we talk about, well, Ilgauskas played 10, Mutombo played 9. Why does it matter when I say a handful? Well, impactful seasons in the decade, I think that Ilgauskas beats him out. But at the peak, in those early 2000s when he was with the 76ers, I think that that was enough to push him over and put him at 50. Again, Hall of Famer, not taking anything away from the guy, but he's remembered more from the 90s. He makes, I want to say, 1 All-Star game this decade. He makes 1 finals appearance. He makes 2 All-Star games this decade. 2 All-Star games this decade, makes a final appearance with the 76ers. He was part of the reason that really put them over the top. He's the part of the reason that team made it to the finals. So for that, you got to give him a little bit more credit. At number 50, NBA champion. This is really where we start getting into it. NBA champion, played 5 seasons in the decade. It's David Lee. David Lee remembered for that run that he had with the Warriors where he was a double-double machine. In 2010, he led the league in double-doubles. I forgot about that stat, but he led the league in double-doubles in 2013. He's 50 on this list because those 5 years in this decade that he wasn't with the Golden State Warriors, he was with the New York Knicks. And with the Knicks, very interesting team in the early 2000s. Early 2000s, Knicks are coming off a finals run in 99. They are a team that was dominant in the 90s. Never could get over the hump because of Jordan. Played in 2 finals with Ewing, but at this point, Patrick Ewing was on his way out. So then they go and they load up on talented power forwards. And this is the Isaiah Thomas GMing of the world, where what is he really doing? Does he know what he's doing? Is he leading this team down the wrong way? Of course, there's a sexual harassment lawsuit that comes down on Isaiah Thomas's run as the GM. But in that time, they get David Lee. And David Lee averages 13 and almost 10, 13.5 in the decade. He's true shooting percentage, pretty solid at 60%. Win share is a thing that we kind of care about a little bit at 36 and about 36.5. But his thing right now is the reason again that he gets into the top 50, and Mutombo and Ilgauskas don't, is because of the value of replacement. Value of replacement 9.6, and that is again, it's on the lower half of the group that he's in, this 50 to 36 group. But when you look at the guys who are trying to break in there, he does have a higher value of replacement than some of the other guys. At 49, NBA champion, another player remembered more for his time in the 90s than in the 2000s. He is one of those weird players, unique in a way that his body starts breaking down in this decade, but still on a championship team, being a competitor, being a contributor. And that's what I think puts him where he is on this list. Here's the thing. If he was, say, the 4th or 5th best player on the championship team, I would say, well, okay, maybe we put him in that next group. Maybe we say, well, he's not a top 50 player. Maybe we say, we'll leave him a little bit further back on the list. But the fact that he won a title, and the fact that I would argue he's the 3rd most important piece on that championship team. It's hard to quantify when you say this player contributes to this storyline contributes to that. But look, guys, we all know the 2014 NBA title for the Spurs. This is not debatable. That if the Spurs played anybody else, if they played, say, the Pacers, or they played the Bulls, or any of those teams coming out of the East that weren't the Miami Heat, you could make the argument the Spurs don't come with the same fire, come with the same passion. But the fact that they lost the year before to the team they're going to face off again, there's heat, there's battle tested. It's just normal. It is the progression of the way things work in sports. You go talk to Isaiah Thomas, and you say to him, hey, the Lakers beat you in 88, in 89, you come with this ferocity, you come with this same fire, the same passion, you get revenge. That's what the Spurs did in 2014. Storylines matter, teams you play matter. The fact that the Spurs and the Lakers competing early in the decade, the Spurs fighting with the Lakers three-peat, they break the potential four-peat, they go knowing that the team coming out of the West is going to win. But I think teams knew, I think the Spurs knew, that David's retiring at the end of the season. That he's on his way out once the final buzzer goes. And that adds something to that title run. And that puts a little bit more meaning onto that title. Now, is it his... should we count that to where he moves up in the rankings because of that? It's hard to say. But I have him at 49, inside the top 50, NBA champion, averaging decent numbers, and with that win percentage, that matters to me. All right, moving on to 48 on the list. Guy who starts his career with the Portland Trailblazers. Makes one All-Star game at the very end of the decade with the Memphis Grizzlies. Another player who, like David Lee, very interesting path to New York Knicks. He played on those Trailblazer teams that were competing for the Western supremacy with the likes of the Spurs and the Lakers to a lesser extent. However, solid numbers that All-Star season at 20 and almost 12 with the Memphis Grizzlies. We talked about it on the last podcast last week about his All-Star season in 2012-2013. We're talking about Zach Randolph. Zach Randolph slips into this list at number 48 for all the aforementioned reasons. He comes into this league being more of a role player, doesn't start any games his rookie year, but by year 3, he's averaging 20 points per game, and his rebounding numbers are incredible. He was a double-double machine for the longest time, and when he goes to Memphis, of course, the Tony Allens, the Marc Gasols, the Mike Conleys, it all works out, they click, they go to a Western Conference Finals in 2013. In this decade, though, in the 2000s, Zach Randolph is known for an enforcer of the same likes as the Charles Oakleys, the Anthony Masons of the world. This guy was hard. He was gritty. Chip on his shoulder. And his numbers backed it up. 17 and 9, close to that, averaging. Win share is pretty good. Win share, just in general, is 38. Value over replacement, a little bit lower than some of the other guys on the list, but still, his playoff numbers are solid, 12 and 7. Look, Zach Randolph, 48 on the list. At 47, he only played 3 seasons in the decade, but he edges out Zach Randolph again. He comes in after winning a national title at Florida. Al Horford at 47, averaging 12 and 10, double-double machine. The Atlanta Hawks, he really helped propel them to that next level. Him fitting in with Joe Johnson, fitting in with Pal Millsap later in his career, and then, of course, going to the Celtics, now the 76ers. Al Horford, very interesting study of the big man who can finesse, the big man who can not only give you something on the offensive side of the ball, scoring, but passing too. I would say that Al Horford, one of the better passers on this list, is even as a big man, and even being compared to some of the point guards. Just his ball vision, just the way that he's able to move the ball around on the court. I like Al Horford on this list where we have him at 47. At 46, another interesting player, a guy who career cut way too short. Let's call it what it is. Career cut way too short. His best seasons are in Houston, where he averaged his career high was 20. His career high was 21 for a season. It's Steve Francis. Steve Francis, 8 seasons in this decade, 18 and 6, bringing 6 assists as well. His win share, his offensive win share is 30. Win share total is 47, one of the highest in this group. Value over replacement is 19. That's the highest to this point on the list at 19.8. Playoff numbers not great, but he did make 3 All-Star games. Again, one of the highest in his group of players. Playoff numbers is 19 and 8. And again, a kind of a do-everything type of player who could facilitate the basketball, could also score the basketball. He's one of the first scoring point guards of the decade. The 2000s are known for that point guard who can get down the floor, can really push the pace, score the basketball. And Steve Francis fit into that mold. Houston, again, just they've had so many great players. The Rockets have. It's hard for me to say that, but they've had so many great players. It's just a shame that injuries derail careers and other things derail careers, and just never everything just can't click for them all at once. Also, an iconic New York Knick. He played the 2006-2007 season, averaged 11 and 4, played in 30 games, started 30 games, I should say. Steve Francis, number 46 on the list. Another Knick point guard at 45, and I put these guys back to back because their numbers were so similar, because whenever I think of Steve Francis, I think of this guy too. It's Stephon Marbury, who younger guys are going to forget about how dominant Steph Marbury was. 45 on the list, 9 seasons, 19-7, passing the ball pretty well. He and Francis both shoot similar from the true shooting percentage standpoint. His offensive win share is just a little bit higher at about 46. But when you look at their complete win share, it's 22.6. Marbury, interesting case, another one of those guys who either the league couldn't figure him out or he couldn't figure it out, but another guy who, when you look at his career in general, you're going to think to yourself, damn, I wish this guy could have stayed over here a little bit longer and competed a little bit more. At number 41 on the list, you remember him from his time with the Utah Jazz. He played that weird power forward, small forward role. His nickname is one of the coolest. Again, another really cool nickname when you think about it. Andrei Kirilenko. Kirilenko. All those years with the Utah Jazz. His all-star season came in the 03-04 season where he averaged 16.5 and 8 rebounds. It's weird that he was one of the best players on that Utah team. I think that you'd put him in that same category as Darren Williams. Just a good, solid Utah Jazz player, especially after the Stockton and Malone years are kind of done. 03-04, to be an all-star that season, in a year that you see Karl Malone, one of the franchises, if not the franchise's greatest player, playing for the Lakers, it's kind of weird to see your guy who's filling in that role almost, the Malone role that he played for almost 20 years, to see it go to a beefy Russian guy who kind of looks like an enforcer. That must have been kind of weird for Jazz fans, but hey, Salt Lake City is a weird town. People don't talk about it enough. That Salt Lake City is really, if you're trying to go get down in Utah, Salt Lake City is the place to be. No nightclubs, not a ton of fun stuff happening in Utah, but hey, you always got Andrei Kirilenko. You always got those memories. All right, let's move on. At 43, it's Brad Miller. 10 seasons, 12.4 points per game, 7.9 rebounds per game. He makes one All-Star game appearance. Doesn't do a ton in the playoffs, averaging about 10-6. Moving on to Rashard Lewis, another player who you remember mostly from his Seattle Supersonics days with Ray Allen. He then goes and plays for the Orlando Magic and plays for an NBA title with Dwight Howard being the best player on the team. I know, that's really weird, rolls off the tongue kind of weird. Played 10 seasons, averaged 18 and 6. One of the original stretch fours. You could play him at the 3, you could play him at the 4. In 2K, and I hate to bring this up, but in 2K, I would always take Lewis when we were playing with the Heat, when we were playing with some of those weird teams. I would take him and make him my shooting guard and just run a super big lineup. And we'd always get beat defensively. Defensively, we stunk. But offensively, nobody could just stay on us the entire game. So, Rashard Lewis, 42. At 41, you remember him most for his days with the Kings. The reason he's so high on this list is because of those iconic Kings teams that should have gone to the NBA Finals in 2001. They got gypped. Chris Webber. 8 seasons in this decade, 20.5 points, 7 rebounds per game. His win share total is 39. His value of replacement, 13.4. Should be a little bit higher. Should probably be one of the better ones. It's a shame that he never was able to get on a team that could really capitalize on what he was able to do. Personally, I would have loved to see Webber match up with or be on a team that could have monitored his health a little bit better. If Webber got on a team that cared about his health, didn't need to ride him the entire time, he is another perfect example, perfect case of if he's your best player, you're in a bad position. Okay, if Chris Webber's the best player on your team, you're not winning a title. If Chris Webber's your second best player on the team, if you could have had a guy like Gary Payton playing with him, you could have had a guy like, say, I don't want to say John Stockton, but a Dwayne Wade even, young Dwayne Wade playing with Chris Webber, I think that you're competing for title year in and year out. But again, the injuries caught up to him. He couldn't stay healthy. He's out of the league relatively quickly. If you got him for a team like the Spurs, team like the Lakers, you could play him off the bench, you could monitor his health a little bit more. I think that he could have been an NBA champion. All right, number 40, top 40 now, Peja Stojakovic, who I forgot had made an All-Star game. Honestly, he reminds me more of, again, another really good role player, not a guy that I would be thinking of making a ton of All-Star games. 10 seasons in the decade, 18.6, 5 rebounds per game, true shooting percentage, the highest in his group at 58%. His win shares, offensive win share is 53. His win share total is 74, the highest of this group, barely beating out another guy, another stretch forward. Value over replacements 23.5. Stojakovic, going to be one of those guys that when we talk about the best shooters of the decade, he's in that conversation. At number 39, Antoine Jamison. I always joked about this guy being he was the godfather of the stretch four, that guys like Kevin Love, Chris Bosh shooting threes all the time wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Antoine Jamison. Is that completely fair? No, but he's another one of those guys that when LeBron left Cleveland, he stepped up and was the best player on the Cavs, which is really weird to think about. But you're going to remember him from his Wizard days in the 2000s. At number 38, NBA champion. People forget about this. NBA champion, Hall of Famer, the glove, Gary Payton. Gary Payton plays 7 seasons in the decade, retires after that championship run with the Miami Heat. He is a guy who gets his ring in this decade. Weird. This beginning of this decade, or I should say the end of the 2000s, beginning of the 2010s, a bunch of players who were ringless got championships and then got out of the league. And you don't remember them being these championship players. It's kind of like in baseball, where there's these iconic players, played 15, 20 years for a team, and then they leave and they win a title, and you're watching the parade, and you go, hey, wait a second, is that Hunter Pence? You're confused. And Gary Payton's like that. Gary Payton is going to be remembered from his Supersonic days. I'm always remember him for being the weird odd man out on the Lakers. He was on that 2004 Lakers team that didn't win the title, lost to the Pistons. He couldn't keep up with Chauncey Billups. It was something that I'm really going to remember. 15 points per game, 6 assists. His win share is his win share is 51. Value of replacements 19.5. He played on some really good teams. He wasn't that great this decade, I don't think. He was a piece that won a title with the Heat, but Gary Payton is going to be mentioned a lot more next week when we talk about the 90s. At number 37 is Ron Artest, who won a Defensive Player of the Year award. He played for the Indiana Pacers. He's going to be remembered most for that Malice in the Palace. He goes to the NBA Finals, makes one All-Star game. He was on that team that went to the Finals with the Pacers, I'm pretty sure. And they were primed to win the Finals the year of the Malice in the Palace. And because of that fight, totally changed the course of Artest's career. Changed the course of the Pacers. Pacers should have been playing in multiple NBA Finals. If it wasn't for the Knicks, Ron Artest's fight, and the Heat, Pacers probably have multiple titles. You can probably count 5 titles right there if it wasn't for those 3 things. So, moving on to 36, and the last guy we're going to talk about today is another former Pacer, a guy who comes in from high school, averages 17.5 and 6 rebounds per game in this decade. It's Jermaine O'Neal. Jermaine O'Neal, special player. Doesn't get talked about nearly enough, I don't think, as a special player. He makes 6 All-Star games in the decade. 16.5 and almost 9 in the playoffs. Jermaine O'Neal, special player. You can't talk about him enough. What am I going to remember most from Jermaine O'Neal? The high school to pros is always going to be something that I think gets talked about a little bit. You look at his career, he goes to Boston right after they are pretty much done as a title contending team. He's like main part of his career. The years he's going to the All-Star game every year is between 2001 and 2007. Pacers, so at that point. He gets traded to Miami. Miami, of course, lets him go because they're going to sign the big 3 that next offseason. Jermaine O'Neal, another one of those guys, most improved player in 2001, 2002. So, something to think about. All right, that's going to do it for the show. I'll talk to you guys again tomorrow when we break down that next group of players. Tomorrow we're doing 35 through 21, and then, of course, Friday we have our top 20. So you're going to want to stick around for that. I'll talk to you guys again tomorrow, and you're going to want to check out, again, the rest of the podcast that we put out. We talk a little bit about Cam Newton and his decision, the Panthers' decision and where he's going to go, and then, of course, the NL West preview. So I'll see you tomorrow when we talk more all-time great players.